There are those who push the boundaries of science in search of discovery, those who devote their lives to unraveling the mysteries of the human body. But every so often, a mind emerges that does not seek understanding, but control. A mind that refuses to accept nature's limits. A mind that believes evolution is nothing more than an unfinished equation waiting to be solved. Dr. Elias Rourke was once considered a visionary, a man whose theories on genetic manipulation promised breakthroughs in medicine, regeneration, even immortality. But genius, when left unchecked, often leads down paths that should never be taken. His research promised hope, but at what cost? It's changing, it's alive. James Calloway walked into that laboratory seeking a cure for the disease that had stolen his strength, his future. What he found was something else entirely. His name would vanish from medical records, his life erased from the outside world. And in the sterile glow of that underground lab, beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, something new was born. But what happens when the experiment refuses to end? When the subject becomes more than flesh, more than human? When the hunger sets in? What happens when the body forgets the man it once belonged to? He's still out there, watching, waiting, and he's not alone. For years, he was one of the brightest minds in genetic research, a scientist who believed that human evolution was far from complete. Dr. Elias Rourke built his career challenging the limits of biology, unlocking secrets hidden within strands of DNA. But one day, his research crossed a line, and just like that, he was gone. No resignation letter, no farewell, no trace of where he had gone. The only thing left behind was a shuttered laboratory and a trail of unanswered questions. The headlines came fast, each more alarming than the last. Controversial scientist missing after unethical experiment. Renowned geneticist vanishes without a trace. What was Rourke hiding? Authorities searched for weeks, but the lab was empty. The security footage? Corrupted. The research files? Erased. And of the few who had spoken with Rourke in his final days, one name kept resurfacing. James Calloway, an ex-military operative, a man once feared on the battlefield, now left weakened by a disease that even modern medicine couldn't slow. His body, once a weapon, now a prison. He needed a miracle. Rourke promised him one. No one saw Calloway enter the lab that night. No one saw him leave. But something did. What began as an experiment in regeneration became something else entirely. The question is no longer whether Rourke found a cure for human frailty, but whether he created something far worse. Science has always borrowed from nature, learning its secrets, bending them to human will. But Dr. Elias Rourke sought more than knowledge. He wanted control. He had spent years studying reptilian DNA, fascinated by its ability to heal, adapt, regenerate. If a lizard could regrow a lost limb, why couldn't a man? And if nature wouldn't give him the answer, he would force it to. James Calloway lay strapped to the gurney, muscles tense beneath the restraints. He had faced war, he had stared death in the eye, but this was different. This was something he couldn't fight. The cold bite of metal against his skin, the steady beep of machines monitoring his vitals. The air reeked of antiseptic, of something chemical, something unnatural. Rourke stood over him, syringe in hand. The liquid inside was thick green, almost glowing under the fluorescent light. His hands were steady, too steady. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. He had done this before. He knew exactly what would happen next. "This is the future, James," Rourke whispered. "And you are my proof." The needle slid beneath the skin. A slow push, a rush of something cold flooding through his veins. At first, nothing. A slight chill creeping up his spine. Then heat, a pressure building in his chest, spreading outward like fire beneath the skin. His body stiffened. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. He gasped for air, but it felt wrong, thick, suffocating. Every muscle in his body coiled tight, spasming uncontrollably, and then darkness. When James woke, the lab was silent. The machine still hummed. The restraints had been removed. His body felt different, lighter, stronger. The pain was gone, but something lingered just beneath the surface. Something unfamiliar. His fingers twitched, his nails, darker than before. He blinked, rubbing his eyes. But for a brief second, the world around him flickered, sharper, brighter, as if he could see beyond what should have been possible. The air carried scents he had never noticed before, every detail standing out in terrifying clarity. Then the mirror caught his eye. He turned toward it, expecting his own reflection. But the man staring back at him wasn't him. The lines of his face were there, but altered. His pupils too narrow, slitted, his tongue flicked against his teeth, sharp and instinctual, as if it had a mind of its own. He stumbled back, his pulse pounding. What had he become? Behind him, Rourke was watching and smiling. "It's working," he murmured, more to himself than to James. "Faster than I anticipated." James turned to him, panic rising. "What the hell did you do to me?" Rourke didn't answer. Instead, he rolled up his own sleeve, revealing something beneath his skin. Raised patterns, barely visible in the dim light. Scales. His veins pulsed unnaturally, and his eyes, they were just like James. "You were my first," Rourke whispered. "You won't be my last." Sleep became a distant memory. Every time James closed his eyes, something unnatural stirred beneath his skin. It was subtle at first, an itch along his arms, a tingling in his fingertips. But then came the heat, the crawling sensation, like his own flesh was shifting, unraveling itself piece by piece. He woke with a start, his breath sharp and ragged. The room was dark except for the cold glow of the lab monitors. His body felt damp, feverish. He reached up, rubbing his arms, then froze. His skin was peeling, not in patches, not like a wound healing, but in long, delicate strips curling away from his body, revealing something beneath, something smooth, something unnatural. James swallowed hard, forcing himself up, his body stiff and unfamiliar. His legs didn't feel like his own. His balance was wrong. He steadied himself against the cold steel table, but his grip faltered. His fingers, they weren't fingers anymore. Beneath the shedding skin, new flesh glistened under the dim light. Dark, iridescent, scaled. His breath caught in his throat. From somewhere in the shadows, a voice murmured, too quiet to be meant for him. "The DNA is fusing faster than expected. The subject may not remain human for long." James turned sharply, his eyes adjusting too quickly to the darkness. Rourke stood at his desk, his back turned, flipping through notes, reviewing data. His voice was calm, as if none of this was unexpected, as if James was just another test result on a page. Something inside James twisted. He gritted his teeth, his voice a low growl. "What have you done to me?" Rourke turned, his expression unreadable. "Exactly what I promised, James." James took a step forward, or at least he tried to. His muscles locked, his spine arched, a violent shudder tearing through him. Pain erupted in his jaw, fire rippling through his bones. He gasped, and then the cracking began. His fingers curled inward, twitching, elongating. His legs trembled beneath him, something pulling, stretching. His throat seized up, his breath shallow and ragged. His jaw, it was shifting, the bones pushing, snapping forward, his mouth widening, stretching far beyond what should have been possible. His scream never came, only a sharp, drawn-out hiss. The lab spun, the world around him blurred. His vision flickered, sharper than before, more focused. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, steadying into something controlled, something different. Rourke only watched, scribbling something onto his clipboard, unfazed, unmoved. James collapsed to the floor, his hands, his claws, digging into the tiles. He wasn't changing anymore. He was becoming, and it wasn't over yet. Imagine waking up and realizing your body no longer belongs to you. Your skin isn't skin. Your breath, your movements, even your very instincts, rewritten by something unnatural, something beyond your control. Would you fight it, or would you embrace what you've become? James Calloway didn't get a choice. The cure he was promised turned him into something else. But was this an accident, or was this exactly what Dr. Rourke intended? What do you think? Was this the next step in human evolution, or a nightmare that should never have been unleashed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you woke up with reptilian abilities, what would you do? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to know what happens next, keep watching. The transformation has only just begun. The transformation was no longer subtle. James' limbs stretched unnaturally, his spine elongated, ribs shifting beneath his skin, his senses sharpened. He could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing, feel vibrations through the floor, smell every chemical in the lab, and something else. Something warm, something alive. His stomach clenched. Hunger, deep, gnawing, primal. His eyes flicked to the corner of the room. A row of lab mice trembled in their cages. Their scent filled his nostrils, their tiny hearts pounding, the sound of blood rushing through their fragile bodies. Rourke's voice cut through the haze. His neural activity is adapting. He's not dying. He's evolving. James staggered forward, his breath ragged, his fingers, claws, digging into the floor. His instincts screamed, fight or feed. His muscles coiled, raw power surging through him. Escape. He had to get out. He lunged for the door, but his own body betrayed him. His legs twisted, bending wrong, balance shifting. He collapsed, his muscles spasming. Too much strength, too much change, too fast. Rourke crouched beside him, eyes gleaming with unhinged delight. You're the perfect hybrid. Then James saw them. The other test subjects. Cages lined the walls. Bodies contorted, half human, half something else. Scales where skin should be. Eyes blank, unseeing. Some still breathing. Barely. Twitching as if trying to wake up from a nightmare they would never escape. James wasn't the first. He wouldn't be the last. James Calloway once had a life. A mother's voice urging him to stay strong. A best friend's laughter over beers. A name, a past, a future. Now! His voice is unrecognizable, low, guttural wrong. His reflection isn't his own. Slitted eyes, scaled skin, a body built for something unnatural. He's faster, stronger, but at what cost? The instincts are taking over. The hunger is growing. The man he was is slipping away. Is he still James Calloway? Or has the experiment erased him completely? James knew he had to escape, but Rourke wouldn't let him. The scientist lunged, a syringe in hand. One last dose to finish the transformation. James struck first, faster than he thought possible. Bones cracked. Rourke staggered, bloodied, but smiling. You'll come back, he whispered. The world won't accept what you are. James turned to the mirror. His face, barely human now. Scales, slitted eyes, a mouth no longer meant for words. His fingers twitched, the last remnants of control slipping away. He ran, into the cold night, unseen, vanishing into the city's shadows. Security footage flickered. A dark shape slithered between buildings. A passerby turned a corner, and never came out the other side. He's out there, watching, waiting, and he's not alone. James Calloway entered that lab as a man, but what crawled out into the night was something else entirely. Did he escape, or did the monster replace him? And if so, who's next? If you think this is where the story ends, think again. He's still out there, somewhere, waiting, and the experiment is far from over. If you want to know what happens next, subscribe and hit the bell. You won't want to miss what comes next.